Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me today. A lot of questions being asked about Manitoba Hydro lately. And as I've said regularly and as recently as Monday, I am always happy to answer questions about Manitoba Hydro. The opposition has said they're going to keep asking questions about hydro, so have I asked questions about Manitoba Hydro. In 10 short years, Manitoba Hydro's debt was tripled under the previous administration. That calls for questions just by itself. Tripled. That is an enormous increase. It means that every Manitoba household owes $45,000 towards hydro's debt. That's not small. And largely as a result of two projects, major projects, the Keeyask Dam and the Bipole III West Line. It's a $10 billion burden put on Manitobans that raises some questions. That burden means pressure on hydro rates, pressure that will continue because of those investments, pressure that will grow, I'm sure, over many years to come. It's unprecedented in the history of our province, and I know that it is a cause for questions and concern by every Manitoban. It certainly is to their government. And because of that, we have commissioned former Premier Brad Wall to do an investigative study and look into some of these things. Some of the questions I think that have to be asked are questions Manitobans well deserve answers to. Manitobans deserve to know why this happened. They deserve to know how it happened. Why would the previous government have driven Manitoba Hydro to do these projects? What role did politics play in influencing the decisions of Manitoba Hydro? We know that there are questions about whether the projects themselves even needed to be built. Why would the previous government have deliberately excluded Manitobans from the Keeyask hearing process? Why did they put this process in the dark? Such a massive project with major environmental and financial implications would normally receive a full and proper public hearing, so why shut Manitobans out of such a process? And how could the previous government have allowed these projects to proceed to construction before they were even evaluated by the Public Utilities Board, by the Clean Environment Commission, who are there to protect the interests of Manitobans now and for future generations as well? And then to understand as well, because if you understand the importance of the Public Utilities Board, and you know it exists to provide thorough oversight to projects and to protect Manitobans against unnecessary costs and undue risk, why it would have been short-circuited through this process. How was the project able, both projects able, to move forward without that kind of oversight? How could the previous government have had so little regard for the environment that they went down the west side of the lakes at 500 miles longer, cut down 1 million trees, and didn't even have an assessment by the Clean Environment Commission? This is called their Needs for and Alternatives to analysis done. Clean Environment Commission has an important role in protecting our environment, especially as it relates to mega projects. So surely there must have been a reason why the previous government didn't want to hear from Manitobans or from environmental experts on the nature of their thinking around these projects. How could the chainsaws have got fired up without any due diligence happening before? So perhaps, and most importantly, how can we ensure that Manitobans don't ever see anything like this happen again? That they're never again not able to have their say prior to a $10 billion decision. A $10 billion burden that Manitobans will carry forward, a burden that Manitobans will have to bear for decades to come. How can we make sure, as a government, that our government and any future government can never again keep Manitobans in the dark when it comes to the decisions, major mega project decisions of Manitoba Hydro? How do we bring hydro into the light, in other words, and make sure this never happens again? I want answers to those questions. I know Manitobans do as well. That's why we commissioned an independent review being led by former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. And so today I am pleased to announce to Manitobans that Mr. Wall's report to them will be released this Friday. Brad Wall is a well-respected, well-liked former Premier of Saskatchewan, respected by people across all political lines. I had the great privilege when I was first elected as Manitoba's Premier to attend the Council of the Federation meetings and to get to know Premier Wall better. I was very, very impressed by his capabilities then, and most certainly I think anyone who has had the privilege of meeting with him or working with him would say that he is a not only well-respected but tremendously capable human being. I would hope that members of the opposition would welcome this opportunity to learn more about the history of these projects, to learn more about the decision-making processes that led to their construction. In the meantime, I would ask most certainly that the opposition pay attention, because after all, it was their government that allowed this to happen. That being said, the important thing here is to learn from this process, and Mr. Wall will give us the opportunity to do just that. So I look forward to, and I thank Mr. Wall in advance for his work, and I look forward to seeing the report, as I know all Manitobans do. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. A reminder to our reporters on the line, you will have one preliminary and one follow-up question. Up first this afternoon from City News, Jonas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Premier. The inquiry by Mr. Wall into this, what is the scope of it, and what do you hope he identifies as a result of it?
Sure. Well, the scope more broadly, Jonas, is the mega projects I referred to earlier, the Keeyask Dam and the Bipole line, which were their companion projects. So this was the scope of Premier Wall's inquiry over a number of months.
And I guess what was he looking into exactly as a result of this? I know he's looking into these two projects, but what is the scope of the investigation? Is he looking into tenders, or I guess what exactly is he looking into here?
Well, he's looking into every aspect of the decision-making process that led to the construction plans being pushed forward. What was the involvement of various political agencies in interacting with the hydro officials in terms of advancing the proposal? What was the ongoing process of moving through the planning and into the implementation? How did it get off the rails? How did it happen that these projects, which we were promised, remember, as Manitobans, wouldn't cost us a cent, turned out so badly, and you know, things like that. Right to the construction itself of Keeyask and Bipole, and how it was that the cost containment didn't work on those projects, and they came in so much over budget, as much as 2.5 times the initial proposed costs. These are important things to learn from, so that we make sure these types of mega disasters don't happen again, and to make sure also that Manitobans are aware of what happened here, because it's their money after all. Manitobans are the real owners of Manitoba Hydro, and this tripled the debt of Manitoba Hydro. So we need to understand why that happened, how it happened, and if there were things that were done improperly or wrong, we need to make sure they don't happen again.
From the Winnipeg Free Press, Larry.
Premier, I know this was asked of officials earlier, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the idea of offering a single dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to as many people as possible, rather than ensuring second booster or a second shot is given within 28 days. There's more and more evidence emerging every day that a single dose of these vaccines is quite effective. And I'm wondering, have there been many discussions about this? What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are I'll go with the recommendations of the officials who study this for a living, Larry, and that's the way it's been up till now. That's the way it'll continue. When we started off with our vaccine strategy, we based our decisions as a province on the recommendations of our senior health officials at that time. They suggested that it made sense from a safety perspective. Since we only had a limited amount of vaccines after all, we were just injecting our personal care home residents and our frontline workers who work there. And I understand that process will be completed pretty much in the next few days, so everybody will get their second dose. At that time, and this is a few weeks ago, there wasn't really a general consensus around the wisdom of departing from the recommendations of the manufacturers, who said you need to get this in for maximum effectiveness in 3 or 3.5 weeks. And so given the reality of those recommendations, we followed those and didn't want to sacrifice more broad-based speed in getting the vaccine out there. We didn't want to sacrifice the safety of the people who were getting the first vaccine. Now you're referring to commentary coming out of Quebec and some other quarters that the first vaccine may be much more effective on its own than was originally suspected. So I'm sure our health officials are looking at that. And if they decide to make recommended changes, then we'll be making those.
Are you excited, though, about the prospect of perhaps giving Manitobans a lot of protection, maybe a lot sooner than we thought?
I'd be most excited if we weren't 57th on the list of countries that are having vaccines available. We don't have enough vaccines, nowhere in Canada. That's the big issue. It's not an issue first or second, that's a side issue. The most important issue is getting vaccines out, because every province has worked so hard. I was on the call last week with the premiers, and we were sharing our perspectives on how ready are you, and so on. I think pretty much to coast, Larry, that the provincial vaccine teams have done a real good job of getting ready. And we'll welcome a flood of vaccines when the feds decide to get them here, and we'll get them out. That's the biggest issue. The biggest limiting factor right now is the fact that we don't have enough vaccines to get them out. The secondary factor is the timing issue. It's one that I'm sure our experts are considering. What's the right thing to do? At the time, a few weeks ago, I thought they made a good decision in putting safety first and making sure that we didn't get a lot of our seniors in care homes, 72% or whatever the number was then that they were guessing at, 72% effective, and then moving on to someone else without getting them 95% affected. I don't think anybody would want their grandma to have, 2/3 of a chance of being safe and instead of 80% or whatever, the ratios are. So we're going to go with the recommendations of our leading people here in Manitoba. That's what we've done, and we're going to continue to do that.
From Global News, Marnie.
Good afternoon, Mr. Premier. A recent poll done this month shows that Manitobans have the lowest confidence out of all the provinces that their government will administer vaccine doses in a timely manner once they have those doses. What's your reaction to that? And given that today we're expanding the criteria for vaccine eligibility, and just what would you say to reassure Manitobans?
Oh, well, I'd say, first of all, reality matters more than polls. So here's the reality, and maybe we can change the next poll. The reality is we're the second in the country at getting those second vaccines out, and that's pretty good. And the reality is our vaccine team is really ready and has been actually praised for all its extensive work over many months as being a model for other provinces to follow by federal officials. So that's kind of neat too. So I would say if poll results are bad, that's less important than actually getting vaccines out to people. And I'm really proud of the work our vaccine team has done, and our frontline workers and our volunteers that have been part of that team, and the growing number of Manitobans that have said they want to be part of that team.
Thank you for that. And my other question is just about personal care homes. We've learned that even with vaccinations, there probably will be little change in visitation rules inside personal care homes. Obviously, it's been a tough time for a lot of families, and knowing that they have more isolation ahead of them despite the vaccine. What's your response just to those families and the seniors in Manitoba that are struggling through that?
Yeah, it's a tough deal, and my heart goes out to all our seniors and their families in this respect. This has clearly been a group that has been most profoundly affected by the isolation requirements and by a number of the other aspects of COVID too, including the fear of getting infected with COVID. Let's understand that our seniors have been some of our most vulnerable people and most affected by the COVID virus. But remember too, that patience, and there won't be a senior that doesn't know this old adage, my grandmother always said it, patience is a virtue. We have to remember that we're only about 1.5% of our population that's vaccinated, which means that it's not just the seniors being vaccinated that's the issue, it's the folks that aren't vaccinated coming into contact with people who are in the homes, some of whom have not had a vaccine, others who work there who may not yet have a vaccine, and so on. And it's those contacts that might allow COVID to spread even faster and further. We don't want that. Compounded by the variants, the reality that they are more present in other jurisdictions as of yet, thank goodness, but those are risks as well. So a little bit of patience. We're going to get there and we'll get through this thing, and I know it's hard, but it's the right thing to do to put safety first.
From the Brandon Sun, Drew. From the Brandon Sun, Drew. Okay, we'll go on to the Winnipeg Sun and Josh.
Good afternoon, Mr. Premier. I know we won't see the report until Friday, but what is your impression of Mr. Wall's report on his investigation into this project? What can people expect to see of it? You want everybody to check it out. You want everybody to look at it, but what can people expect to see from the report?
Well, I think that they're going to be very impressed by the depth of work, the investigative work that the former Premier Wall has done. He's gotten into the causative decision-making processes. That's really important to understand. How did we get this plan, this preferred development plan, pushed forward? Why were there no changes made to it after it was pretty clear that there were things like the rapid expansion of available competitors in North Dakota and elsewhere that might have made necessary changes a beneficial course of action? Why were off-ramps not chosen? How was the process of consultation designed, and why was it altered? Why were there decisions made to limit the amount and the scope of people's opportunity, Manitobans' opportunity, to have their views expressed and to learn about these proposals? These are serious questions that need to be answered. The questions around the Bipole line and the direction and why it was chosen, $1 billion of additional investment to go halfway around the province, that's an issue that so many people have questions about. And Mr. Wall's work will give some answers to a lot of those questions, I'm sure. So I look forward to reading the report in detail along with Manitobans.
The Legislative Assembly, I believe, is expected to sit again in 1 week from today. What can people expect from the government? Are there going to be more supports or COVID-specific bills coming forward, or will the province be proceeding with pushing through? Many of the bills are brought forward in the fall that we haven't actually seen yet because it's before we haven't got to that second reading yet. What can people expect to see 1 week's time when you guys sit again?
Sure. Well, the COVID responses will continue, and of course some of that is not legislative, as you know, but we will be excited to continue to offer as best we can supports to help our small business community get through this difficult time. The legislative agenda is one of the most ambitious I've seen in my experience here in Manitoba and in Ottawa. There are a number of reforms that will be announced and are going to be coming forward in important areas of public life that affect all of us: education, in terms of reforms long overdue there, and many, many other initiatives that are coming forward. So it's going to be an exciting time. Of course, COVID underlies everything. We're all concerned that we be careful and be safe, and so the sitting itself will be conducted under the same rules that we had last fall, Josh. So the distancing and so on that we must continue to do, and the limited seating in the chamber will be an aspect of, we anticipate for a while at least, our upcoming sitting. So I look forward to seeing our colleagues virtually. Of course, we've been seeing each other enough, but to see occasionally, to be able to see them here at work would be nice too. And the work that we're undertaking is truly, it's ambitious, but it's important to make life better for Manitobans.
From CBC Manitoba, Bart.
Hey, Mr. Premier. Earlier today or earlier this afternoon, Dr. Anderson spoke about the expansion of the eligibility to adult First Nations. She said the province is also speaking to Métis authorities about some form of eligibility for Métis Manitobans. What can you tell me about that?
I can tell you very little. I've been in meetings since 6:49 this morning or so. So I don't know what Dr. Anderson's comments were, Bartley. I'm sorry, but I have been very impressed and have tried to impress upon our teams from the get-go the importance of consulting with our Indigenous population, with our Métis population as we move forward. We're all in this together, and everybody's affected, but in particular some of our more vulnerable communities, Métis and First Nations, are profoundly affected, as we've seen in numerous reports. Reports by the CBC have chronicled some of the situations, and other media outlets obviously as well, that have faced our First Nations residents. So the more I think that we can abide by and demonstrate our support for reconciliation in the way we deal with issues that affect all of us, but affect profoundly First Nations and Métis communities, the happier I am.
So on that note, do you think there should be some additional eligibility, a lower age cutoff, for example, for Métis Manitobans?
Well, I've heard President Chartrand make the case that Métis people are more vulnerable. I haven't seen the science, and I know that our vaccine strategies are not totally, but largely are based on science. And so I know Indigenous people's likelihood of, or life expectancy is significantly lower. And so I think that that's why the recommendation was made to administer the vaccine at, I think it's 20 years earlier for Indigenous Manitobans than would be the case if you were non-Indigenous. I understand the rationale behind that decision. As far as a discussion around different age applications for Métis Manitobans, I'm not aware of where that discussion is at, but if there's science behind it, if it makes sense, we should proceed cooperatively to follow the science.
From the Canadian Press, Steve.
Premier, the report you say is coming out Friday. I assume, perhaps incorrectly, that you may have seen it already, at least in draft form, because usually people who prepare reports for government give an advance look at the affected parties. So have you not seen the report at all? Can you not tell us what's in it?
I've seen a draft report, and I have a pretty good idea of the nature of the topics and the general direction of the investigative work, but I'm looking forward to seeing the final copy. And I know that Manitobans will want to have an opportunity as well to review the work that Premier Wall's done, and I know he'd be excited to see his work reviewed. That's the point of this, to take Manitoba Hydro out of the darkness and into the light, so to speak, so that we can actually understand how we got into this, this $10 billion burden. How did we get into that situation? How did it get so out of control? Those questions need to be answered because we don't want it to ever happen again.
And you were asked earlier about the upcoming legislature sitting in the spring. One thing that we were hoping to get a look at, and I know you were blocked by one of the opposition parties from tabling details of the bills before the spring sitting, is the education reform. And are we going to see a reduction or perhaps elimination of elected school boards?
Yeah, you will. And that report will be coming in due course. Minister Cullen, I know, is excited to get underway with the work. We've put a tremendous amount of legwork into the initial, as you know, the initial research and consultations all across the province with thousands of Manitobans. We've gathered those ideas. But no, there's no hiding from the fact we have one of the most top-heavy structures in the country. There's no hiding from the fact that we should take those resources, find savings, move them to the front line where the kids are. And we also we all know, who follow and love education and know it's a priority investment, that Manitoba continues to be among the leading provinces in the country investing in education. But we want to make sure that those investments pay off in a better education for our kids. So that's the goal here, and I think there are some exciting ideas that are going to be coming out in the spring session that I know Manitobans will want to venture in and have views on this. I come from a family of teachers. We We welcome discussions around education, most get-togethers with our family, and I know many Manitoba families understand that their real potential as people wouldn't happen, would never have happened without the opportunities our teachers, our professors, our educational institutions have given us in our lives. So we've got to do a better job for our kids. That's the onus of the recommendations, and that's the onus of our action plan that'll be shared with Manitobans in the not too distant future.
And sorry for this, but I just want to clarify. When you said yes, you will, was that yes, you will see the education reform plan, or yes, you will see the elimination or reduction of elected school divisions?
Well, yeah, you'll see the plan. I don't want to preview Minister Cullen's work, or you'd say I was a control dictator. So I don't like having that said about me because it's not true. So I'll simply say this. I think there is no doubt that there is a top-heavy structure in Manitoba. How we are going to reform it will be part of the plan that will be enunciated by Minister Cullen in the not-too-distant future. Thanks for giving me the chance to clarify that, Steve.
Our final reporter this afternoon, Mr. Premier, from CTV Winnipeg, John.
Good afternoon, Mr. Premier. John Hendricks from CTV. Just in regards to Keeyask and Bipole III, when you say that you want to be certain that nothing improper happened, do you mean that something criminal may have happened in regards to these projects?
Not asserting criminal wrongdoing here, John. I think that the Wall report will outline a variety of things that were done, how they were done, and come up with recommendations as to how they might be done better in the future. And that's what we're after. This is it's designed to be a constructive exercise in an honest evaluative process to determine how this thing got so out of control. We're talking about two projects that were purportedly not going to cost us anything, that clearly the cost got out of control, and the payback for these projects is decades away. So we have to understand how we got down this road and how we can how we can make sure that as we move forward, the kinds of processes that we use are best designed to protect Manitobans' best interests, not necessarily the interests of American customers. And so it's important that we learn from this past experience and not run away from it. And don't listen to opposition howling, talking about privatization. Every time we talk about hydro, it's like Pavlov's dog, we ring a bell and they salivate and start yelling privatization. Nobody should listen to that. That's an insult to the intelligence. What we need to do is learn how to get Manitoba Hydro back strong, into the light, working for Manitobans. And that's what we're after.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering, how concerned are you that some people may pretend to be First Nations in order to advance their place in the line to get their vaccine?
I understand the fear. We all share it. COVID's a killer. It's affected over 800 Manitobans. It's killed over 800 Manitobans. So I understand that, but for heaven's sakes, we've got to be patient and respectful of the process of getting our vaccines. Wait your turn. I'll wait mine. You wait yours. Let's make sure that we remember that there is a cure in terms of this vaccine that we understand is not perfect, but is worth waiting for. And so don't disrespect the prioritization that the vaccine committee has come up with, largely based on age. Don't do that because we're all in this together, and you taking someone else's spot with a false information is just a temporary attempt for a cheap victory that in the short term isn't worth it given the sacrifices of character that you're going to make if you do that. Just don't do that. We will get our vaccines. The federal government's been slow. The Prime Minister would be the first to admit it. They've been slow to get our vaccines out. But when they come, and they're going to start to come now, wait your turn, and we'll get to this, and we'll get through this together. Thanks, everybody. I want to finish on a bit of a difficult note, but I have to say the reaction, as I said the other day, to the findings of an independent arm's length evaluative process about wrongdoing by an NDP MLA. who made false accusations, it was found, against a member of the civil service, again and again. Were reacted to, I think, rather badly by the NDP and made to be a partisan thing. They're not a partisan thing. These same rules were used and applied in allegations of wrongdoing and harassment against not one, not two, but three other members of the Legislative Assembly, all progressive Conservatives. And the accusation that I would intervene as Premier in this process is not backed up by the facts. Yet that's what Wab Kinew went out to the media and told them. I would never do that. I would never interfere with a process designed to protect workers from harassment. And for Mr. Kinew to point the finger at my office and falsely allege that I would intervene in any way in this process is just a pure flailing at the wind. It's disrespectful to the process that all parties agreed to. It's disrespectful to the process that we used quite correctly to censure the behavior of other MLAs. And when he says he has the back of his MLA, this isn't a street gang. This isn't about gathering up partisan gangs and having two separate rules, one for the NDP and one for everybody else. This is not what this is about. This is about ensuring that everyone in our government and in our government service is protected against harassment. And so this is a much bigger issue of principle than the NDP leader seems to understand. And so I would implore him to take action and his caucus to take action rather than signing a statement saying that their member did nothing wrong when they know that's not true. Instead, take the appropriate action and censure the member for his misconduct. That's what our government did. And every member of my caucus and every member of my cabinet knows there are not ever going to be separate rules for MLAs or cabinet ministers. They will never be exempt from the rules around a safe workplace. No bullying, no harassment. That's what happened under the previous government, and it appears that Mr. Kinew wants it to happen again. That's not on. So I want to say thanks to everybody for your kind attention to this issue. But it is very, very important that we know going forward that our children, our parents, our family members who work for the government of Manitoba are safe. Always. Not some of the time. And they don't have to be in a certain political class to be safe either. And if they're in a political class, that doesn't mean that they're not responsible for abiding by the rules. Thank you.